Jay Fuhrer is a longtime conservationist growing up in the Dakotas on a small grain and livestock farm. He built a career taking care of the soil, working at the NRCS from USDA from 1980 to 2020. That is a long career out of Bismarck, North Dakota. Jay particularly enjoyed working from the pickup end gate on the field edge with a spade and the client. So this is your favorite tool too. That's great. Conservation planning is one field at a time. I love that. Currently, Jay spends his time supporting soil health efforts through the Menoken Farm. The Menoken Farm is a conservation demonstration farm and is Jay's favorite place to work. Here, the 5 soil health principles can be applied while monitoring plants, animals, and soils. His work in this field allows him and others to farm forever. Please help me welcome Jay to the stage. Don't get past here and here, forward, reverse.
Thank you. Good morning. When Vanessa sent an email, my first thought was we need to have a conversation to see if I'm your guy. You know, when different groups make contacts for these type events, I like to have a conversation because if I'm not your guy, I'll help you find them. Help you find that person that can lean into what your group is about. You're a great looking group, I must say. You're rather impressive. And so it's really fun to be here. My wife, Kathy, is with me. So we're in our 70s now, and the two of us together are just about one person, pretty close. We just had our 50th wedding anniversary, and we decided to re-up and try another 50. I understand it's a little more challenging on the second 50 than the first 50, but we'll find out and see how that works out. So I'm much more comfortable on a field edge with the end gate down and some soil on the end gate and looking at things from that perspective. So today I'm going to try to put that into a PowerPoint format for you. And so a lot of my slides and topics are complete talks that you will get in one slide. And so we will cover a little information. And take a look at some of this. I want to set the stage for this great agenda. And I want to set the stage from the viewpoint of things that they can maybe springboard off of, or things that they can go, my God, I think you got that wrong, or whatever it is. It's best to just air it out in a group. And I think that's how we learn, and I think that's how we can kind of share information. And so we can take a look at that. So I'm assuming green probably advances this a bit. We're going to give that a try. I'm just going off the top of my head here. So a couple other thoughts. I do want to thank the organizers, Boulder County Parks and Open Space. I learned about them last night, and I learned about open space. You know, the concept you have here, because I wasn't that aware of it. And that is, I think, as someone said last night, a great human experiment. And I think it puts you in a best position. CSU Extension, I see as one of your organizers, so welcome to them as well. USDA NRCS, so if you are an NRCS employee, if we have some in the group, big announcement yesterday by the Secretary of Ag, huge announcement. So NRCS doesn't have the best track record in some areas. And one of the areas was always, in my 40-some years, we had a tendency to reward those that probably shouldn't have been rewarded. And those that should have been rewarded sometimes weren't rewarded. And so hopefully this endeavor can by-step some of those pitfalls and can make something that is effective in that regard. After that many years with USDA, I think I earned the right to say that. And I think they need some criticism. And I think, you know, we always need to be told we can do a little better. So that was the environment that I grew up in. Longmire and Boulder Valley Conservation Districts, my hat's off to any conservation district. I see them as the future of conservation. And so there's been so much change within USDA that without the conservation districts, we don't have the flagship going forward, addressing our natural resources. So big hats off to them as well. So we're going to talk about a few things today. And this is just a shot at Menoken Farm. We're just harvesting yellow pea here one evening. Kathy took that picture. And now and then, if you take enough pictures, you get one that kind of represents. And so I kind of like that one for today. So we're going to start with that. And we're going to talk a little bit about the state of agriculture in the Great Plains. So this is the area I want to talk about is a big area. I've worked quite a bit in Canada, specifically Alberta, Saskatchewan, those areas in there, and a few others. And then across the U.S., I used to get farmed out by NRCS, North Dakota to NRCS and other states. So I've worked in most states, not all, but probably a good 40 plus. And so I'm a little bit aware, and if you are an NRCS employee, I can see into your soul. There's no question, so that should make you nervous, right? And so we're going to take a little bit of a look at this. This is going to be a bit of a journey. And so where we've been, a little bit of how we got there, what worked, maybe what didn't work, where our awareness levels were at certain points along this journey. So we're going to start with this journey of 5 decades, and it's going to be one slide per decade. And like I said, each slide today could almost be a topic unto itself, but I've been told you're above average IQ group, so this should work out pretty well, right? So welcome today, appreciate you being here. So the 80s. So in the 80s, Kathy and I bought a farm, and if you remember the 80s, super high interest rates. I mean, like 14%, 16%, 18%. Interest rates, really no money in ag. It was a very difficult time. I put an erosion grade on each decade. So the erosion grade in the 80s is poor. Poor, fair, good, excellent rating, definitely poor. Our erosion rates were horrendous in the areas that I worked in the Great Plains, through the Dakotas and Nebraska and on down south to Texas and that whole large area, our erosion rates were horrendous. And so we had HEL and wetland inventories came about at that time, so that was a big impact. And you also had full tillage of everything, right? Everything. And so it was how we farmed. All our early attempts at no-till failed. And so I was involved in all of those, and I can guarantee you they failed. They fell real hard. And so we didn't understand the plant community as well. We didn't understand diversity. Without diversity, these systems typically do fail. No cover crops. If you said cover crop, my thought would have been to you that that's fine for you, but I don't want anything to do with it. You're going to take my water, my nutrient, my time, my expense, my equipment, but I didn't understand plant physiology. I didn't understand at that time that every green plant is a carbon inlet. And if you don't bring energy into that soil, you can't build an aggregate. And so you have to have that energy, that sugar carbon exudate come in. Every green plant in the first 6 to 8 weeks of its lifespan gives off sugar, gives off carbon sugar exudates. That is the food supply for the biology, that first 6 to 8 weeks. After that, with plant physiology, it starts to reverse. It wants to make grain. And so that's part of this process. And so we need to capture that energy. And when you have diversity of plants, you have diversity of what's in the exudates. So you make a little bit better banquet. Our dominant crop through that whole area at that time was spring wheat. Wheat can build an aggregate on its root mass. Wheat, oat, barley, any of the grasses, corn, they can build aggregates, okay? A lot of our broadleaves can't build aggregates. But at that time in the 80s, even though we were really tough on the environment, we could still build back aggregates with wheat because we had wheat at that time, okay? And so we were also breaking native grasslands. So our native grasslands in the Dakotas, 100 plus species per acre. So that's 100 different exudates to feed the biology per acre. And then when we replaced it with one. right? So we went from 100 plus different species giving off 100 plus different exudates to 1. That alone tells you you're going to be in some serious trouble. That alone, okay? And so that's an item you have to overcome. So when I first started looking at cover crops, I got some real pushback, strong pushback, because I was using too much diversity. I didn't feel that way because I was accustomed to 100 plus species per acre. So when I started looking at 10, 15 different species in a cover crop, that seemed still to me pale in comparison to what it had early on. So, and carbon was something I couldn't have told you anything about in the 80s. I could have probably spelled it right, but after that, probably not so much. And so that was the process. So our erosion grade was poor. And then on terms, in the lower right-hand corner, that was our term in the 80s in conservation, was conservation tillage. Never liked that term because it was always way more about tillage than it was about conservation. And so that was the 80s. Ronald Reagan was our president, and the 80s were a difficult item in terms of, I think agriculture in this country struggled in the 80s, especially with the high interest rates. Cell phones in the late 80s, first field office computer. My first office computer was around 83 in North Dakota is when we started to some implementation of an actual computer that did a little bit of Word and a few other items. There was really no USDA program to put it in it at the time, okay? So, gives you some idea where that's at. Dominant crop, spring wheat, still building. I was also building a lot of structures. So when I started, I liked math, I liked numbers. The engineering aspect was a good fit for me. I worked a lot on furrow irrigation, land leveling and irrigation, those type activities. I built a lot of waterways because we had water erosion without end. So I'd build waterways all summer. That was one of the larger workloads. I was going to engineer my way out of erosion. What could go wrong, right? What could possibly go wrong with thinking like that, okay? The 80s. So the 90s, George Bush, Bill Clinton. First presidential email was in 94. I have no idea what President Clinton sent, don't need to know. And so, but that was kind of the start of email. That was a big item at the time. We started putting some no-till systems together with diversity. In 93, that was a guy named Gabe Brown. And so he was on our board at the time, and so started looking at some crop diversity, and this was getting our feet under us. And we had a long way to go. And we'd get together and look at each other, and we'd talk about saving water. I don't know what we were going to do with it, but we were going to save it, right? And so we started in that scenario, but as we built soils, we eventually that topic went away because we had resiliency, started in with some resiliency. So I stopped building structures. I actually proclaimed this to my peers within NRCS. I said, I'm not going to build any more structures. I'm going to start working on something we're starting to call soil health. I want to start taking a look at some cover crops and some of these type aspects. And nobody said a word that day at our state convention, but I had lunch alone that day. And so nobody said anything negative to me, but nobody said anything positive. Nobody talked to me. And so, that's what you do with strange people. So cover crops, our first producer, again, that would have been Gabe Brown, 1 to 3 species, kind of where we started. Major crop was still spring wheat, corn and beans were just moving in. Those of you that are familiar with GMO beans and corn, mid-90s. Okay, 95, 96, I think beans actually came out first, followed by corn. At that time, we formed a soil health team because one person alone, pretty difficult. Plus, it's a lonely road. And so you need support. We're human beings, and we need some support. We started putting together grazing systems as well. Couldn't stop the native grass breaking, still ongoing. Okay, 90s, we're still breaking out grass. But I started to monitor carbon. So when I did conservation planning, how many steps of conservation planning are there? Anyone? 9, what's the last step? Yes, I don't know who you are, but I really like you. Okay, so evaluating the plan. One thing I did differently in conservation planning than my peers, I did step 9 first. So when I knew we were going to make a change, we're going to go from, let's just say, a tillage system to a no-till system. I would do the before and after. So I would take soils before and I'd archive them, because I knew I was going to evaluate the plan after it was in. Evaluate it to what? If you don't do the before, if you don't do the groundwork for step 9 ahead of time, evaluation gets more difficult, and the evaluation is where you learn and the client learns. Where you both learn together is if you have step 9 ahead of time, okay? So erosion control was now fair. That's the 90s, George Bush, Bill Clinton. Our term went from conservation tillage, now it was no-till. Erosion was fair, so we went from poor to fair. Definite some improvement. In the 2000s, I started writing descriptions for soil health principles. I didn't write the principles, they were probably written by nature, but I did feel it was important to write a description of each one. And so eventually NRCS posted them. Not right away. They had to stare at it a while. They had to think about it a while. But eventually they posted them onto their website. And we started to implement them within the agency. But that was a process. And so I've written and rewritten descriptions a number of times, I would say maybe roughly 5. And each time you look back at your previous effort and you go, my goodness, how sad was that? And then you do a little better job on the next go around. So spring wheat in the 2000s was still our dominant crop through that whole big area, but corn and beans now are gaining fast. They're coming on really strong, okay? YouTube was in 05. Changed how we learn. Positively changed how we learn. We'd pull up a topic, we'd listen to it. If we didn't relate to that person, we'd pull up the topic with a different speaker, right? And you could stop it, rewind it, listen to it again. If you're like me, you're watching somebody graze cover crops in the evening, you're sitting in your chair, you fall asleep, and then you stop it, you back it up, you listen to it again. It's good stuff, right? So we started using grazing systems with a lot of paddocks. This was our golden era. Erosion control was now good. We could build soil aggregates deep, and that's really important. You can't just build them on the surface. You got to build them as deep as you can get a plant root down. If you can do that, you can keep pH in much better moderation. And so all of this, and it also harvests out deep water, it recycles your nutrients. So it was really important we did this deep. And at this time, this was our peak area for crop diversity, the golden era for us, okay? And a huge, large area of this nation, big area of this nation. And so the 2000s, soil health started to be the term we were using. Erosion control was good. George W. was our president at that time. And so this was kind of us in the 2000s. Oh, the 10s. Those of you that are here that remember the 10s quite well, I'm rewriting soil health descriptions. Now I'm starting to rewrite. Soybean acres now rival our spring wheat acres. So beans are taking us over through this whole big area. Beans where we never thought they could even grow. Okay, so now this is really changing. A soybean isn't evil, but it's very weak at building a soil aggregate. So now you're replacing a high carbon crop, wheat, that can build an aggregate and provide a lot of armor on the surface with a very low carbon crop that is incapable of building much for an aggregate. What difference could that possibly make? I can tell you the difference it made for us. Our erosion rates just went right back up. Didn't matter if it was a no-till system. You don't have enough cover. You can't build an aggregate. Soil moves too easily. It's gone. Too weak of biomass of remaining residue on the soil surface. We also were still breaking native grassland. Can't seem to stop. It's a human aspect, right? It's the human aspect. It keeps going to cropland, keeps going to cropland. Fewer acres, higher beef prices, fewer cattle. So you start looking at that and you go, okay, that's tough. Now we dropped down to fair to good for erosion. So we're sliding, but we also know a little bit about the 4 parts of carbon. As when I started, I couldn't have told you anything about carbon. But now I could start to understand that if you're going to put carbon in and diversity of carbon, you're going to have a green plant. If you can have livestock on the green plant and graze it and let the plant reset, you can start milking carbon, right? You can start pumping carbon, and then these things change. Regeneration is a term now you hear a bit. I think terms are made to be changed, right? They're made to be reinvented, so I don't see anything odd about that. I think that's common. So now we're talking regeneration. Barack Obama and Donald Trump were the presidents in the 10s. So in the 20s, we went to President Biden and President Trump. Our erosion control now in that area is port of fair. Now I don't want to drive in the daylight from Bismarck to Fargo in the spring. I'll drive it at night. I don't want to see it. So soybean is now our dominant crop. Now we have soybean on soybean at times. We can't build the aggregates back. It's plant physiology, it's soil function, it's science. It's telling you this, okay? So then we started looking at things like planting green. So this is the era that we started looking at how do we plant it into a green environment. Rye or winter wheat, which can build the aggregate, can be terminated later. So we started trying those type things. Breaking native grasslands, still going on to this day, still going on. Regeneration traction, carbon, cover crops, no-till, a lot of those words are thrown around pretty loosely. And in terms of building it, what moves the carbon dial, that's usually just a lot of work that has to be put into place with plant diversity and figuring out that marketing scheme and figuring out how you stay in that game. So the 20s, I think, were pretty interesting as well. Also, I put on there Red Trail ethanol. That's an ethanol plant hour west of Bismarck. First in the nation, started to inject CO2 emissions, okay, into the underground caverns that North Dakota has the geology for. I'm not here saying right or wrong to things. I'm here talking about topics, okay? People much smarter than me can determine what's right or wrong, but I want to talk about topics and their impacts, what we're seeing on the landscape, okay? So that was our 5-decade scenario. Kind of gave you some idea how we got here, where we are today, how we are all connected. I thought our two first speakers did a really nice job explaining the human aspect of how we are connected, right? Because we're connected to everything. It's like microbes in a green plant. The microbes are inside the plant, they are outside of the plant, they're inside the seed, they're outside of the seed, they are the plant. And so when we start to understand in this interconnection with our own microbes and the soils, and we start to understand how when we ripple on one side, it reacts on the other, then we start to understand this whole scenario, and we start to understand how we went from some fairly nutrient-dense food to some not so dense food in the nation. And you start to understand that during that period, that 50-year period, how much carbon we lost. So now we have carbon deficient soils. And so you look at that, and now it's difficult to get nutrient food with a carbon deficient soil. And so once the soil doesn't have aggregates, it doesn't have life. So when you take away the aggregates, that's the air supply, that's the water infiltration, that's the biology's home. It serves all these purposes, and without it, it doesn't function. So the start. So I was given 3 slide rulers. Some of you have no idea what that is, but on the left side, there's 3 little slide rulers that we used back in the day. So when I started with USDA in 1980, I was given those, and here you are. And so, of course, you went to training sessions and you learned how to use a wind erosion calculation, water erosion calculation, furrow irrigation. And what I said that what I really needed was the items on the right-hand side. I needed a spade, which of course they supplied me with, but I needed to understand how to read it, right? I needed to know how to read it. And I needed 2 sieves. I needed a 1 millimeter sieve and a 2 millimeter sieve. And you put them on top of each other. And so you put the 2 on top of the 1, put some soil in it, put your hand over it, shake the bejesus a bit. And then you start to get well-separated, well-sorted aggregates in the lower one. Everything in the upper one that's still in there is above 2. Everything that was below 1 fell out the bottom. And now you got soil aggregates that look like they are ready to go into the water container that you see, that little white circle that you can see. It looks like pepper on water. Now you're looking at water stable aggregates or lack thereof. If they dissolve, not so good, right? A lot of work to do. If they say stable, good for you. You're moving in a good direction. Simple things. Doesn't cost a lot. 2 pieces of plastic. Doesn't cost a lot, right? And so also I needed a better understanding of the 9 steps of planning. I needed to understand how to set up myself in terms of evaluating the plan before I started to implement a new system or add a cover crop or add plant diversity. How do you monitor those soils? After 10 years of treating symptoms, we formed the team. So this was kind of the nuclear core of the team. They were all good people. They were all challenged. We had a good conversation early on that you're going to be facing an impossible task. We want you to change the world. We want you to have more nutrient-dense food. We want to get erosion under control. We want to build soils, not decide how to slow the loss. We want to reverse it and build a soil, which you can do. And so this was the challenge. If you're going to have a group, I think they get more enthused if they think it's an impossible task. If it's too easy, it's kind of like ho-hum, right? But this isn't easy. This is difficult. Those of you that have done it know it's not easy. These were my mentors. So they were all people I did nothing more than ask, would you help me? Every one of them said yes. And so these were all mentors. There's more, but we're not going to go through all of that. So these are all people. I'll give you an example. James White, rhizophagy. He's the Rutgers guy. And so I'm talking to him in Kansas one day, and I said, how did a Rutgers guy stares in a microscope all day long? Why are you here in the central part of the nation talking about soil health? He said, I want to be part of it. I said, that's a good answer. That's a really great answer. And he said, I think I can help. I said, also a great answer. So all good people. I also needed practitioners. And so I asked these people to help. And they were all practitioners, really good at what they did, really keen minds, and they all think a lot differently. When you jump out of a box, there's people when they get out of that box, they slide down the side of the outside. And then there's others that stand on the edge of the box and they jump as far as they can away from the box. Well, these were jumpers. They didn't just slide down the outside of the box to get out of it. They jumped as far as they could. And so this was a team. And then going forward, where to start, I'm going to summarize this into 5 areas. Obviously, there's more. But for me to go back 40-some years, this is where I would have concentrated on. I'm an old monitoring guy. I like to use a total mineral. So if you listen to John Kemp's podcast, he'll talk to you about total mineral, kind of like a mining company would take of an area. So it's a one-time thing. So we did that too. Total mineral kind of gives you total volumes of everything you have. And then I've always used a soil health assessment for inorganic and organic. You need it for both. I like leaf analysis because end of July or maybe earlier, I'd like to do some leaf analysis. And then also I'll say this to you, anyone that wants a copy of this PowerPoint, they're more than welcome to it. I share it with you anyway. PLFA is the biology. And so when you first start using a PLFA, it doesn't mean anything, but you're building your baseline, right? So your biology numbers, if you will. Do you have fungi or don't you? And can you improve the fungi, because they're kind of the holy grail. And then VES is what you see on the right side and that sheet on the bottom. VES is visual assessment of soil structure, and I really strongly encourage you to use it. It's very user-friendly. It gives you a way to kind of put a numerical grade on your soil. I don't like spending money on anything. It's my heritage. So I don't like spending money on anything. I want to do everything on the end gate of the pickup, and I want the results now. I don't want to wait. And I don't want to spend money on it. I want to feel it. I want to smell it. I want to see it. And then you start to understand what you have and what you don't have. And I think that's a good way for a conservationist to work. So when I do VES, I got 10 cropland fields. I take 10 cardboard tubes, I cut them in half, and I put my soils in them. And then I can do a VES grade, and then I'll take my little sieves and I'll sieve it also, so I know water-stable aggregates. If you want to count out 10, you can do some nice easy math on 10 aggregates in the water. So things like that, pretty easy to do, gives you an idea if you're moving forward or backwards. And then carbon stewardship, we got to get out of this thought about carbon sequestration. It's all we can talk about, but we're missing the big picture. The big picture is carbon stewardship. So carbon sequestration is just one small part of carbon stewardship. Carbon stewardship is a thought process the grocery buyer can get behind. Carbon sequestration doesn't mean anything to that grocery buyer. You know, we're pumping CO2 into a cavern off of an ethanol plant in North Dakota. We're never going to use that again in our food production system. We need to be thinking about carbon stewardship. Dr. Jansen in Canada did a really nice job. So when you get a chance, read that article, Soil Carbon Sequestration versus Soil Carbon Stewardship. We really need to lean into stewardship. That's the entire cycle. It's how carbon feeds us. Some of us like to eat every day. Some of us, like me, like to have at least 3 times a day, you know. So I think the stewardship makes just so much sense. So when we look at this from a stewardship viewpoint, we look at this and we start to understand where the carbon comes in. And we start to understand that it's in the living organisms, the dead tissue, and then eventually the very dead tissue, right? So living, dead, very dead, kind of like a Clint Eastwood movie. And then you have like the humic substances are going to further break down into the fulvic and the humic and the human. They no longer decompose. That's the end of the decomposition trail. So when you look at products that include fulvic or humic acid, yeah, you're probably going to have a positive impact in those scenarios because you've just taken a large area biomass, reduced it down into the end decomposition for it, and you applied it in concentration. Yeah, you're probably going to have some impact. So what I wanted to point out on here, on the 3 bottom boxes, you see the line that says soil food web. On the right side, least resistant, and then in the middle, soil food web, some resistance, and then soil food web, great resistance. Why do you think it does that? Why do you think the soil food web goes from least to some to great resistance? What's the soil food web looking for? They want food. So when a product has great resistance to the soil food web, it likely means there's nothing left for them to harvest out for food, okay? So you start to understand that, and you start to see how these things work. So the human basically becomes structure for the soil, okay? And so you start to see that scenario. But think about food, always food in a home, food in a home, food in a home, just like us, right? Okay, help me out with this, 17 elements, so I want you to help me out with this, all right? So C, B, H, O, O, phosphorus. Potassium, right? So what's N? S, sulfur, iron, chlorine, manganese. What's the MO? Moly, yep. What's the NI? Nickel. Cu? Copper. Yeah, good job. I knew it. There's always a smart one in the group. We know what table to sit at now when the test comes, right? Okay, Cu. So Zn and Mg. Yeah. So these are 17 items that green plants use. Sometimes you'll see 18, sometimes you'll see a little different number, but this is pretty close. This is in Nature and Property of Soils. So you're looking at if we could just eat the soil, we wouldn't need these plants and these animals. We don't need them, right? If we could just eat the soil. So humans have eaten small amounts of soil over time. That's been documented a number of times, that it's small amounts. And so, but if we could extract all that, but we're monogastric, so it's not that easy for us, right? And so we prefer a plant or we prefer a meat protein. And so consequently now it's game on, right? Because now these have to go into something. So what I've done recently to kind of help my knowledge base on this, I've taken green plants and I ferment them based on Nigel Palmer's book, Regenerative Grower's Guide to Garden Amendments. Some of you have maybe watched his podcast, or maybe Acres USA, he's been a speaker there, or maybe you picked him up. So, but it's a one-to-one scenario. You take the green plant, harvest it in the morning, when it's got quite a bit of moisture in it yet, quite a bit of water in it, and then it's 1-to-1 ratio of organic brown sugar to the green plant, and then you ferment it for about a week, and then you decant it, and you have the liquid. And then I send the liquid in, like the lower right, because I like to monitor stuff and I like to stare at the results. And so then you go ahead and you start to understand. You are not expected to be able to read this, but again, I make this available to anybody that wants it. So then I go ahead and I record these. I'm building my library. So I understand what's in a dandelion. So I understand what's in rye if I use ryegrass. So I understand what's in these, right? And then I start to put together, and I also use it then as a bioinoculant on the seed. And so it makes some sense. So if you want to grow tomatoes, I want to use my tomato plant ferment. It's already in the right proportions to what a tomato wants, right? And these are not my ideas. These are Nigel Palmer's ideas. If we've done anything in life, we probably stood on someone's shoulders. And so you find people's shoulders to stand on, or better yet, if they'll kind of give you a little push up even, and then you can maybe take part in something that happens in agriculture. And so this is just one more process, but it's something I would do. And then instead of learning about N, P, and K as I was taught in college, I would instead, I'd probably keep it to 3, but I'd be carbon, hydrogen, oxygen. And those are really important, right? I mean, N, P, and K is there, but carbon, hydrogen, oxygen is what drives, okay? It's what drives. And then you put different things together, different ways of putting these alphabets together for those 3, right? So we have oxygen, carbon dioxide, water, sugar, carbonic acid. Remember back in the day when we were all paranoid about acid rain? Remember that? Remember the acid rain era? Okay, every rain is acid rain, right? Because you have water coming together with CO2. So you're going to have some carbonic acid. So every rain. It's what makes soil over geological time. So a desert hasn't had much rain, so it's a very young soil. Then you go to Iowa, it'd be a very old soil, right? So it's much more weathered into smaller fragments because of rain and carbonic acid over geological time. So sugar, we know this: sunlight, chlorophyll, CO2 from the atmosphere, water from the soil, we're going to give off some, when that stomata is open, we're going to give off some oxygen, we're going to give off some water vapor. But the carbonic acid in the soil structure is so important too, to give us hydrogen ions, especially if we're looking at maybe too high of a pH and we need more hydrogen ions available, especially in a deeper profile. This is how that happens. So we got to have this carbon source, we got to have hydrogen, oxygen, and carbon. And then these things start to happen. Potential hydrogen, I'm not going to spend any time on this, but I have things on here for cropland on large scale, and I have things on here to treat small scale, like gardens, high tunnels, those type things. So I'm a big user of coffee for pH adjustment. If I want to lower my pH in my high tunnel, I like the coffee's 4.5, but the coffee grounds are 6.8. So you can kind of start to see your way, right? And again, I don't want things I got to spend money on. So I'm going to get your coffee and use it in our high tunnel production. And so you find your way on that. Then also, what I wanted to point out, obviously elemental sulfur is a good product, but a carbon source will cure way more things when you're looking at lowering high pH. And so if you can bring the carbon in, you can start to make a hydrogen ion available. So raising, if you have a low pH, that's more my environment because of excessive use of nitrogen fertilizer. So it isn't the nitrogen that goes into the plant that lowers our pH, it's the nitrogen that doesn't go into the plant, which is a huge amount. Gotcha. So soil health principle descriptions, write and rewrite, that would have been another thing I would have started on much, much earlier. Write them. You don't have to get fancy. Start with a paragraph for each, for your neck of the woods, what you're going to write on. If you want, I'll send you a description of what I've done more recently. Be happy to do it. Vanessa can send it to you. She's got it as well. And so it's a writing and a rewriting. Don't look at it as a finished product. Okay? It's an ongoing product. So a little bit on indicators. So we know we're there. We know we're there when our landscape starts to look like the right side of the slide. When the landscape looks like the left side of the slide, you're not there, right? You're not there. So that's a good visual. That's why when I drive down the interstate, it's a tough drive for me. When we drove down here, we drove through Wyoming. It was all grass. I loved it. It looked great. The other way you tell is if you have a 4-foot probe and you have a root mass coming out of the end of the tube on a 4-foot probe, congratulations. You've done something really well. You have life 4 feet down. You have carbon 4 feet down. You have biology 4 feet down. You have soil aggregates a long ways down. So that's another little more intimate way you can look at it as well. But the landscape and the 4-foot definitely are indicators. So Menoken Farm, prior to the Menoken Farm, I did 5-acre plots for many years on a number of farms in the Dakotas and other places, other countries, wherever. And so you set up a monitoring area. I don't need to do your whole farm. I need 5 acres. And let's go ahead and make a change there. You don't have to risk the farm. You can risk a small area. And then we did conservation demonstration plot for another 99 to 13. So these are all leading up to the Menoken Farm, which consists of all these. Local indigenous language, it means you reap what you sow. So it's meant to honor our local indigenous people. Right? I think that's important. There's always people before you that you stood on their shoulders. And so you look at all these items, cropland fields, outdoor garden, high tunnel garden, beetle bank, beetle pollinator bank, turned and static compost, tree arboretum, rain garden, learning center, the video library, we record and post videos, and they are there for all to use. There's been a huge amount of USDA money that went into making that video library, and as I told USDA, it's the best money you ever spent. And so they are very helpful with it. That's the farm. And so consequently, it's got a few buildings. You can see the high tunnel. You can see my leachate pad where I collect vermicompost liquid extract. All these items are there. And your assignments, right? And so when you are done reading these books, I will give you more. And let me tell you, no pressure now, but in a lot of states, I have received that second email that please send me the next list. So no pressure. I don't want Colorado to be the only state that has never sent the second email, okay? No pressure. But there's a lot of great reads. Buffalo Harvest, listening to the two individuals that opened up for us so nicely, that's a tough read because it's who we are. That's a tough read. That's when we took them all out. Frank Meyer wrote it. He didn't condemn it or condone it, but he participated. And it's a tough read. Soil Owner's Manual, what a way to start. John Sticka, an old colleague of mine, writes really well. Just came out with version 2. I just had the email from him. Just came out with version 2. They're all good reads. Every one of them. I'm not going to go through them individually. But you can go to our YouTube channel. That's Menoken Farm. You can go to our website, menokenfarm.com, and you can watch any of the videos that are on there. And so the Menoken Farm is kind of a throwback to the old demonstration farms. Prior to legislation for soil districts, we had demonstration projects and farms in America. We had 2 of them in North Dakota. They ran for about 4 years and they were declared to be ineffective. And Roosevelt sent out legislation to all the states at that time to form soil districts. And so the Menoken Farm is a throwback to that original demonstration, but owned by a present-day soil district. So I had an individual say to me the other day, what if you fail at the Menoken Farm? He said, what are you going to do? And my reply was, what do you think we should do when we succeed? You know, it's the human, right? It's the human aspect. I mean, we're a bit like that. And so, yeah, maybe we will fail at some things. Maybe we'll have to get up a few times and go again. But I think we need to speak for the resource. And I think we need to look at the whole nutrient density. It's so important. Many times I think I started monitoring at the wrong end of the food chain. You know, I started in the soil. Should have maybe started at the other end. But you find your way. And a lot of you know what I mean by that. You find your way eventually. And so with that, I think we're really close. Vanessa, are you giving me the look? Oh, okay, so I got a couple minutes yet. And we got a couple minutes for questions or just a couple minutes before we... 3 minutes for you and then more questions. Okay, all right, little clarification. And so just kind of wanted to thank you for what you do in my closing as well. It's a group effort, right? When I think about trying to go down this road alone, it was really hopeless. And you need all that expertise. You need all the support because at the end of the day, we're all human beings, right? And the human is kind of structured that way. They got to have some support. And I think we have to shore each other up. I have an informal agreement with one of my old clients who is about my age, and we have agreed that when we turn into bitter old men, the other will call us out and say, look, you're turning into this bitter old man and you need to pull out of this. And I think that's important. And I think we need purpose-driven lives. And I think we need challenges, maybe challenges we're never going to totally succeed on, but nutrient density food is a great one. And I've often said if we could take out more pesticides out of the food chain, if we can put more nutrient density into the food chain, if we can make those impacts with our youth first, because making them with me now makes no sense, but with youth. We need the younger children. They need a better food supply, whether they're in school or at home. It's learning, it's their future health, and we need to have this at birth. And so you start looking at these are all things that are so important that we start with. And so the soil is the basis, conservation is foundational. And so conservation is foundational. And without that, these things don't go long term, okay? And so as we start to understand the changes we can make. My second talk later today will connect with this, and it will be, okay, now we looked at the last 5 generations, now we're going to step into the arena of what are the impacts after we start to apply this. And so we will look at that in my next conversation with you. So what's the best way to jumpstart poor dryland soil using little money? So I would sell it, right? Right? That's what we would do in North Dakota. So I think what you're looking at is we could not make an impact in our area in the 80s and in the 90s until we put cover on the ground. There's 5 soil health principles. You always want to start with cover. And so when you put cover on the ground, something very strange happened because we are a low rainfall environment in central North Dakota. We don't have irrigation or very much, but it is a rather low rainfall area. And so when we put cover on the soil, something really strange happened. Our soils hydrated. Didn't know it was possible. Positively never saw it coming because they were always bare, continually bare. And so we removed everything all the time. And so you look at this when you start to put cover on the ground, the O layer, which is how soil scientists always used to talk about soil profile, rather than jumping right into the topsoil, they kind of sometimes bypass or don't talk about the O horizon, the organic material. And so perennial forests, perennial grasses, our soils were built with an O layer. And so when you put the cover back on, good things happen. What's the best way to how serious is the cheatgrass threat to native grasslands in the West, and what should we do? Whether it's cheatgrass or whether it's cedar or juniper, we are so understocked. We are so understocked. And because we are so understocked, we have the livestock on for long periods of time. And so this is not how they evolved. They're crying for a bit of help. And so how they evolved with huge impacts, typically bison primarily, but not exclusively. If you read the journals of Lewis and Clark, they were a big part of it, but not exclusively. And so when you read the part of Lewis and Clark between Pierre, South Dakota and Bismarck, North Dakota, there's a great description where they could see 3,000 animals at a glance, wherever they looked, minimum. That's a lot of critters, right? That's a lot of critters. And so we need the huge impact. We need animal impact, and we need animal impact for a short period of time, but extremely heavy. Therein lies the balance. So if you can bring them in there for who was the guy at Wawota, Saskatchewan, Neil Dennis. I used to go up there every summer. So our team would go up there every summer, and you could move 1 million pounds of beef per time. He'd move them 6 to 7 times during the day, and you could do that with him, right? And then that evening, he'd build a big fire, and you would have maybe a cup of tea. It was a good time. And so we'd go up there and you'd move livestock. Well, I'd bring my spade along, and I would look at the soils that he's done this on for a while. I didn't have to look anymore. I didn't have to hear anymore. I can see what that was. I could see those impacts. And so you start to see these invasives come in, especially when you've changed the structure, right? It isn't what used to happen. It isn't what built them. And when you take away what built them and you change it to your convenience, that's when you see these things happen. But the higher density, short periods of time, you'll start to see these change, but it takes a lot of numbers, a lot of hoof action. At the Menoken Farm, we use yearlings and sheep together because you get a better trample. You put them together, you marry them up, the first day in a small area, then about 3 days of getting to know each other. The first day, the yearlings run the bejesus out of the sheep, round and around and around, and then they kind of get tired and they look at it and go, I don't want to do this anymore. And then they start eating together, and at the end of 3 days, they're not sure if they're a yearling or a sheep or what they are, but they're all good. They're all good together. And then we put them onto the grazing system. Get a really nice trample with the two together. But we need these higher concentrations on our grasslands. What was the greatest failure you overcame on your farm, and what did you learn? Oh, wow. I've had so many failures that I can't begin to tell you how many failures, okay? And so I think probably some of the greater failures was being hesitant initially stepping into diversity. So diversity isn't adding one different plant. Nature's diversity is enormous, and that complex web. And so if I could, go back in time, I would have brought in much heavier amounts of diversity right away with no hesitation. And so I understand there's other aspects, right? There's marketing and there's all these things that come along with it. But when you come in with the cover crop, for example, I would have embraced it even sooner if I would have known, right? And so looking back at 40 some years, yeah, I got a ton of failures. That's a whole day's course right there. But that would have been one of the things. Plant diversity drives. And without it, nothing much happens. And so we have a hesitancy, I think, to do much of that. Does the responsibility of soil management fall on legislation or on farmers to take a stance? I think it's all of us. I don't think you can wait for legislation. I think I've worked hand in hand with researchers over the years and a lot of the scientists. And a lot of times what I've seen is a farmer, a rancher, a gardener made something happen. And the scientists unlock it later. They unlock it because they have the capability to do that. But somebody was innovative and they put something together and it just started to sing. When we first put together multi-species covers, I didn't understand why the soils improved like they did. I didn't understand. So we drove down to one of our mentors at Pierre, South Dakota, and we said, why? And I think it was Dr. Beck at the time looked at me and he said, I have no idea. But he said, I think the answer lies in native rangeland. Well, it certainly did because of plant diversity. But all of these items, I think we have to take it upon ourselves. We can each play a role, we can each do something. And I think then we get behind carbon stewardship, right? Because now we're foundational in conservation. Now we're starting to improve these things. Are we good, Vanessa?
Will you take a couple more?
Oh, sure. We have a lot of prairie dogs on fields here. There's some back and forth about their benefit to the soil with agriculturalists on one side and advocates on the other. Okay, prairie dogs. Trick question. So a few years ago, we had Alan Savory on holistic management, and he's at Bismarck. We've had him for 3 days. My wife, Kathy, drove him for 3 days because he always wanted to go back. He was elderly. He wanted to go back to the motel and rest during the day and then re-engage again later. So she would drive him back and forth. And then when we were done after 3 days, he had this big talk. And it was in our Heritage Center, beautiful setting. And he gave this wonderful presentation. It was big stuff, big world stuff, right? Big planet stuff. Holism. If you ever read Smut's book on holism, anyone read Smut's book? That's what Alan Savory used. Okay, so if you read Smut's book, you have no life, because that's a slog. That's a tough read. That's a slog. But it's the basis of holism, right? Well, anyway, long story short, Savory gets done with his talk, and in typical fashion, hand goes up. And we said, okay, we'll start the Q&A. Prairie dog, I got these prairie dogs. What do I do with them? I want to make them go away. Well, we had just talked about all this big picture stuff on the planet, and now all of a sudden we're talking about a field on prairie dogs, and Ellen Savory's answer was, I don't know, what don't they like? What don't they like? So what I've seen effective, put up a perch. Put up a perch. They don't like it if you feed in that area. If you winter feed livestock, they don't like that. And they don't want to perch on that area because some predator bird is going to sit there. They don't like that. And so those, you got to look at things holistically. Look at them from the viewpoint of what do they like, what don't they like. And then we got pretty good at building soils with our team because we were fantastic at destroying it. I mean, we could destroy soils like you've never seen. Well, when you have that knowledge base and you decide to flip that and start building, it's really helpful because we knew all the things not to do, right? We knew them all. But it's a little bit that way with the prairie dog. What do they like? What don't they like? They don't like feeding. They don't like perches. Yeah.
Last question.
Last question. How do you start soil health conversation with the conventional farmers? That's a great question. Need your elevator speech, right? There used to be such a thing because you got so much time in the elevator with that person, right? And then there's the attention span. That person eventually is still kind of looking your way, but they're not maybe connecting with you after too long a period of time, so it's got to be kind of short and concise, right? And so you know the principles. You know the principles. They were intended for starting points. That's what a soil principle is. It's not a practice. The practice starts when you write the description. So you know what practices you are going to use to meet that principle, right? Remember the old Mel Brooks movie when he came down from the mountain with 3 tablets and he had 15 commandments, and he's just excited, and then he drops one, and he goes, 10 commandments. And so you need the 5, have those 5 or however many you want to use right in your head. But they were intended to be used as a suite. They were intended to be used together. And I always start with armor. So I always start that conversation with basically what that person is doing, what they're dealing with, what that resource concern is, but always with how do we get that plant started? How is the benefit? What's the benefit to them? I get a corn bean producer in the elevator with me, and this is a hardcore, full input, corn bean, doesn't want anything to do with cover crop, hates livestock, just wants to do this. And then if you're in North Dakota, you go to Arizona for the winter because most of North Dakota owns a home somewhere else. And so they're not interested in livestock. They're not interested in these other aspects, but they can do themselves a big favor by changing how they grow these plants. And I'll go into that this afternoon. And that's where I start, it depends who that person is. See, I have an avenue with each of these different producers. A gardener. My God, we have a gardener, right? So, exactly. So a gardener, how many gardeners typically use a cover crop? How many use plant companions? And how many use all the herbs with the other plants? And so if it's your uncle, it's herb. If it's a plant, it's herb, right? So you find who that person is, and then there's a way to kind of move in. But at the basis of that conversation are the principles. Have those in your mind. Have a description in your mind. Write a description out. And then when that opportunity comes, step into it. It's a great conversation. You'll never regret it. Thanks for your time today so much.